think critical mass is about 30 plus, isn't it, at the moment?
So I think you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, great.
It's quality, not quantity, that counts.
Ah, yes, I can see all our top thinkers are slowly filing in. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us here. It's been an exciting PI, and it's been an interesting convening these last few days. So thank you to everyone for organizing that. We're going to be talking about the business operations workstream. There's been lots of parallel conversations alongside the reference architecture and the DDD work that you heard from Pedro and team from earlier. So let me just get started in there. Why do we care and why are we getting all excited about things at the moment is really because where we are right now with MergeLoop, as a community, we understand this is the year for adoption. That's our main focus for the entire community. And we're seeing a groundswell of interest. There's a lot of inquiries out there. There's a lot of interaction we're having at all levels, both in terms of niche solutions for industry players, the kind of things we're seeing in Myanmar with the microfinance institutions. And we're seeing national payment solution interests. But we're also seeing that there's some kind of core functionality that is not quite there yet and appropriately productized in the switch. So we've been talking a lot about those business services and business processes that we need to be able to support as common elements across the entire platform, and how to provide those to any adopters so that they can quickly leverage the solution, get into market, and start affecting change. Now, this is what we're all trying to solve, and we have actually been looking at this. And if I'm on the right screen, I can actually change. As a community, I'm presenting, I think, the findings from the workstream, where ultimately what we are heading for here is a set of financial portal version 2 for demonstration. That would be an indication that we are there, that we're in a place where we can easily present the goodness of MergeLoop in a way that is easy for people to make the commitment to actually adopt. We're looking for the ability that the actual business processes are there and can be exposed and used by community members, that they can actually put their own presentation layers onto that, and we're going to see some good examples of that at the moment. Where was I? That we've changed the model, and I think this is something that we were highlighting with the bounded context conversation within the reference architecture, is actually it's really important that we can divide and conquer, that we move away from kind of monolithic components and solution thinking to make sure that we actually have a micro everything, a microservices encapsulation of the business processes, and a micro front end to render those out. Because the real benefit in the open source community, of course, is that we can then invite contribution. Like we were just talking about in the PISP workstream, we say we're in a position where we have a wider community now, ever-growing community, and folks that are able and willing to roll up their sleeves and start contributing to it. So we've got to actually increase the coal face around what we're doing. So, and all that, I seem to have lost the one of my key points here was really that these business processes establish a core set of business engagements using best practices, with the security built in, with the actual way that is good to interact with the system being encapsulated in those processes. That means that when we get to presenting it through our different white labeled presentation layers or services, where it's incorporated into other people's existing infrastructures, it's going to be fine. We know that the core solution is going to deliver in the way it's expected to. So the proposed solution that we're talking about at this PI is really that we'll have the characteristics of having a broad surface area. Lots of people will be able to actually get at that coal face and be able to deliver and work at it. That means we continue doing what we've been promoting from the start around API-led service creation and extensible UI framework. The UI framework is not the focus, it's just for demonstration, but it gives people a platform that they can build on. The role-based security and how we actually work with roles, how we allocate activity and how we record activity, key elements to any financial system. We know that risk and fraud it's a key element of what we're trying to manage here. And as a hub operator, one of the key things you want to do is make sure that you're keeping yourself, your customers, and your people in your organization safe. And it's simply implemented through proper auditability within the solution itself. Technically, and James will talk through some of the technical elements here with us in a few minutes. It's the principles we've been talking about across the board the last few days. Segregation of microservices and the front ends associated with those. Standardizing the identity management, authentication, and authorization. We don't have to reinvent those wheels. They're already there. There's solutions available, open source solutions available that we can leverage. And making sure that the user experience is sufficient, that we have a precompiled bundle of services that actually give a demoable experience to adopters and provide the template from which they can actually enhance and develop their own experience on top of. So where are we coming from? It's worth saying that within the community, we have folks who have a lot of experience of delivering financial services. We've had people, whether that's in the mobile money space or the core banking space, or the core microfinance space. In particular, we've had Cybrin and Mifos been very involved in these workstream conversations. So we're not starting from a blank piece of paper. Or there are lots of folks in the Multiloop community who have supported the creation of large-scale financial systems. So we want to build on that experience. We have been, we already in the system have a set of APIs which expose both the Multiloop APIs, the FSP-IOP, which allows us to do the transactions. We have the operational APIs currently under the resource tag of administration. We have settlement, we have reporting, and we have PISP, as we've just been talking about in the session before. So we have a lot of the levers we need to pull. And really what we're thinking about now as we're thinking about the business processes we need to support is how do we pull those levers? What sequence of pulling those levers is actually legitimate? And what authorization do we need to actually allow us to leverage the core solution? But we're not, again, there's some of this which has been realized. There's a finance portal version 1, which has been kindly donated by the Mawali team. That's got some of these things implemented. There's Postman scripts and procedures which allow you to pull a different set of levers. And there are a lot of security, which the actual implementations, real-world implementations at the moment are using via WSO2. And I can see some of the pings there in the chat. Sorry. And WSO2 is providing the API gateway as well as the identity access management subsystem. So, and that's been used to some extent. But like all technology platforms, we've done some version 1 work. We've gotten to a point where we understand what's good and bad about that, and it's time to evolve. So during the last PI, there's been a lot of review of the business processes, and I'm not going to bore us all going through that list now. There's Leslie Ann's been the custodian of collecting that and syncing that. There've been lots of contributions from community members, I think, from Paces, from Google, from Modusbox, from Cybrin, Mifos. There's a long list. You guys know who you are. You're on the call right now. So we've all been contributing into that and having a discussion around what does a complete set of services look like. And I think also what we've done is we've really explored the possibilities around UX layers. We have a finite amount of resources. We do not want to be reinventing wheels as much as possible. So getting an understanding and syncing up about what's available, how we might use it, is very important. And I don't think we'll have time to do it today, but it's already on the website at the moment on Possible, the Cybrin demo, where the team at Cybrin have done a great job in actually connecting up their front end onto a merge loop backend system. And almost everything of what you're seeing in that demo is actually literally pulling these levers, pulling the APIs that you use, that I referred to in the earlier slide. If there's time at the end, Stefan can come in and join us and just talk to us a little bit more about that. But it is very powerful because it's starting to show, that our API-led approach is working, and that in the cases where we don't have greenfield situations, there are significant levers to be pulled there by other organizations. But there are also things which are just clearly missing that need to be standard. And I think Leslie Ann introduced the term of table stakes. To actually get to the table, we really need to make sure we have covered off some of these things. So one of the big areas is really the making sure we've got a proper audit trail around operator actions. If anybody interacts with the financial system, it's really important that we have a full and complete history of those interactions. That allows us to actually, as I said earlier, protect both the operators, the hub, and the participants involved in any transactions. And in a financial system, that kind of integrity is essential. But currently, that hasn't been the focus of where we've been doing work. So as we look at PI 14, we really want to move the stake in the ground forward for us here. We have spent a lot of time violently agreeing with each other, I think, as a community. So I'm inviting all of you to join us tomorrow, where we'll have a hopefully our final workstream discussion on this format and these topics, where we can really ratify that the business process areas that are priority, participation, lifecycle management, settlement management, liquidity, it should say, monitoring and management, those are the key services that we need to be exposing and evolving for parties here. And on top of that, we have the operator auditability around operator actions. We really do need to make sure that we've got that plumbed in. Now, a lot of these things are available and easy to do, but part of the standardization that will happen in this process is we'll have a good, a standard approach for things like 4 eyes and 6 eyes, how we get confirmation around activities. So we'll be able to build those things into the core platform at an API level. That means that anybody coming along and using it and presenting it through different APIs, through white label solutions, they will be ensuring the correct behavior and accountability and compliance below the scene. We're going to talk a little bit today. James is going to take us through in a few minutes the technical approaches that we've been discussing in the community. I think this aligns with many of the ideas we've been talking about in the reference architecture. We want to agree that we actually consolidate the role-based access control initiatives. We already have this in cases like Mawali, obviously, which is a live system that's been running. We already have it in other pilots and infrastructure where we, as I said earlier, we're leveraging WSO2, sorry, and we are looking at ORI as a candidate replacement within the hub environment for that. And it's important, yeah, that actually the IAM solution is not a replacement in its entirety, but it can actually enable the federation of identity when you're going into a pre-existing organizational structure. And ultimately to support our kind of pillars 1, 2, 3, and 4 of our initiative at this phase is we want to come out of this process in the next PI with a deployable, demonstratable finance portal version 2, which helps us demonstrate, helps us when we're in front of RFPs for national payment solutions that actually people can see the vision that we know is tied up within the merge loop switch solution itself. Now, I'm going to ask James to just take us through some of the technical details. Again, we're just keeping things high level, and we're going to talk more about all of these in the workshop sessions tomorrow.
Thank you,
James.
Warren. Hi, everybody. Nice to see so many familiar faces again. So the first slide Warren's going to put up is a slightly busy diagram. I apologize for the high density of information on this diagram. The intention here is to illustrate a kind of high-level overall approach to the architecture of what we're calling the business operations framework. And you'll notice that at the bottom of the diagram, we have our Moduloop core features with its APIs, some of which will be very familiar to most of you, the admin API, the settlement API, for example. And then moving up a level, the meat of the business operations framework is formed by these operational and experience layer APIs. There's quite a nice correlation, I think you might notice, between the way these APIs are segregated and the way the bounded contexts in the reference architecture workstream. Oh, Warren, we've lost your slide. Warren. Warren. Thank you. So you will hopefully be able to see some correlation between the bounded contexts that came out of the reference architecture workstream and the way we've segregated some of these APIs. So we have areas like participant lifecycle management, fees, interchange, billing management, in that layer. Now those APIs are intended to encapsulate the business logic that composes maybe one or more API calls to lower layer APIs in order to support an end-to-end business function. That business function would be managed and triggered and monitored through a user experience layer. And you can see that in the micro front end section of the diagram there. So for each kind of bounded context operational support API, we have a corresponding micro front end. The idea here is that one chunk of reusable front end code can be instantiated in several or one or more portals by compiling them into a bundle, which gets delivered to a user's browser. So if, for example, the DFSP self-service portal needs to have functionality around participant lifecycle management, then it can incorporate features of that micro front end. The same pieces of UI functionality can also be incorporated in the business operations console or the tech ops console. So it's a way of reusing code that we write once that pertains to a particular business process or set of business processes with its API support in a reusable way through a layered stack. Do you want to move on, please, Warren? Next slide, please. So I know Warren said it's not, well, it's probably not so important as the APIs we're hoping to build, but we do want to come out of this with an example of an experience layer that allows people to understand how they could use Moduloop as a business, how to operate the platform. It's not just a piece of software with APIs, and I have to work out how to pull the right levers to make my business processes function. I have something that I can take off the shelf, that I can press buttons in, I can see what's going on inside my platform, I can understand, I can interact with it, I can press the right buttons I need to do to make my business processes work. One of the things we're really keen on is avoiding traditional web server technology architecture, where dynamic content is rendered on a server and then delivered to a browser. In recent years, there's been quite a paradigm shift away from that kind of hosting of content, because web servers have turned out to be quite a security minefield. And there's an awful lot of vulnerabilities been discovered in traditional web server technologies. They're a very big surface area, and it's quite avoidable if you follow a different type of pattern, which is what we're proposing to do here. So by pre-compiling and bundling a set of essentially static HTML and JavaScript, you can deploy that to a user's browser using a content delivery network, a CDN, which doesn't have any functions apart from responding to an HTTP request to get that content. It doesn't render any content. There's no intelligence in the CDN. All it does is deliver the HTML and JavaScript to the browser. That front end, rendered by JavaScript and HTML in the browser, performs its functions and retrieves its dynamic content by making calls to the business operations API, that layer of new services that we want to build. Obviously, that has to go through some kind of authentication and authorization mechanism. We don't want just anybody being able to do anything in a financial platform like Moduloop. So it's really important that, as Warren said, that we layer in a solid authentication and authorization platform. There's an awful lot of good open standards in the world that we can make use of. Kind of centering on the OAuth 2 standard, it seems to be where the majority of the industry are going as far as best practices these days. And one particular kind of sub flavor of that, called OpenID Connect, seems to be particularly suitable to what we're trying to do here. So we're proposing that we look very closely at using OIDC, as it's called for short, in this piece of work. Some of you might be thinking at this point, well, yeah, Warren, if you can move to the next slide. Some of you might be thinking, well, I'm going to deploy my portals on a public CDN. Well, yeah, you could do, and there's not really any strong reasons why you wouldn't. There's no particular secret source or secret information in that bundle of HTML and JavaScript that would be any use to anybody without the ability to gain an access token to log in and pass through the layers of security to make those backend API calls. But we don't want to be very prescriptive with adopters. We want to give people options to do things the way they're more comfortable with. So as an alternative to using a public CDN, you can also use a private CDN, which is illustrated in the next slide in a very simplistic manner. These diagrams aren't meant to show a great deal of detail. But there are open source CDN technologies around that would make it relatively straightforward and cheap and easy to host your static portal bundles on an internal network and even secure access to those. So you can't even download that static bundle unless you've passed through some security controls. Next slide, please, Warren. So authentication and authorization is a big part of what we want to do in this work stream. Current implementations, at least that I'm aware of personally, have all layered authentication and authorization on top of the existing modular loop offering using API gateway technology, essentially. WSO2 has been mentioned. That's the main one that we're aware of people using in anger. It does solve large parts of the problem to add security in a layer like that above an API that's particularly unaware of security. But a much better solution is to embed security further down into the stack, slightly deeper. So the API code itself becomes aware of the need to restrict its actions based on who's asking it to do something and information about the context in which those requests are being made. As I said, we're very keen on using open standards like OAuth and OpenID Connect. That gives a lot of freedom of choice. The open source and even proprietary enterprise software market is full of options for adopters who might want to make a choice, or who might have something within their existing enterprise infrastructure. Most IAM solutions now support these protocols because they're so widely adopted. They have the advantage that because they're open source and they're widely adopted, they're under an awful lot of scrutiny from people in the industry. And if there are security vulnerabilities or issues found with them, as there were in, say, the version 1 of the OAuth protocol, they end up being resolved fairly quickly and publicly, so everyone knows about them. They can fix and patch their systems very quickly, which is quite important. Warren briefly alluded to the notion of using role-based access control, and it's a very powerful way of mapping business functions within an organization to technical controls in underlying software implementations. So what we're proposing, and what I think is generally very widely accepted in the community at present, is that we should use a flexible way of mapping users to roles and roles to fine-grained permissions, and those fine-grained permissions to technical controls within the implementation. And we think that gives the longest, the most flexible long-term way of implementing security access control within the modular loop APIs, especially in the BizOps related APIs. With that set of fine-grained permissions implemented in code, an adopter is free to mix and match and compose their own role structures based on those fine-grained permissions to match their own internal organizational structures or business processes, however they wish. We are however, proposing that we give a set of these roles and permissions mappings off the shelf as a kind of hello world security package to show people how you might use this system, but also to provide the facility to allow them to compose their own as may suit their particular need. Next slide, Warren, please. Okay, OpenID Connect. This is something that's been raised as being very promising. It's based on top of OAuth 2. I don't want to go into too much detail about it, but essentially it's a super flexible semi-REST-ish type API that matches quite well with the existing Moduloop API implementations. And it supports multiple types of client, as well as web-based portals, mobile apps, just about any kind of device can be supported with this framework. So should somebody in future think that Moduloop needs a mobile app for monitoring or managing some of the switch internals, or for operations staff who might be out of the office, then this works really quite well with those. Also allows people to bring a single identity and do kind of single sign-on type things. That you could bring your Google account, your organizational Google account, for example, and use that as your login to your Moduloop switch. I think that's about enough on that. There's plenty of information out there on the web about these standards if anyone's particularly interested in digging in any more detail. This diagram, again, forgive it please, it's semi-detailed but not super detailed. It's not supposed to represent an actual finished design. It's just showing some concepts of how an API call would pass through some layers within the code implementation. You'll see there on the left-hand side our user making a call through his bundled browser application. So his JavaScript makes a call to the API, which hits an auth handler in an API service. And that auth handler will look at the request and see if it has a session token, a cookie that has a valid authentication token. If it doesn't, it will redirect that user to a login service provided typically by the IAM solution itself. So the browser goes off and renders a login page provided by that IAM solution. The user logs in, and between the auth handler and the IAM solution, there's a little secured exchange whereby a token and a set of claims are returned to the auth handler. Now those claims contain the set of roles, or role groups, if you want to think about it like that, that the user belongs to. So the auth handler now has some knowledge of the roles that API caller carries with him. And it can map those roles to the individual fine-grained permissions as defined for that service itself. So, for example, somebody with a role called settlement initiator, for example, might map to a local permission, which is create settlement. So the request handler for the create settlement API call will check to see if that permission and that role exist in the set of claims for that API caller. If they don't, it will return an error saying, no, please go away, you don't have permission to do this. If it does, well, then it allows the request to proceed and writes an audit trail entry at that point as well. Something very important that's not shown on this diagram. In the audit trail, the details of the user, of course, carried by the token as well in those claims, the username, and various other details can be configured as well. So you could record the username, part of the token, some cryptographic information to correlate at a future time with the IAM solution, to identify the user session. So you can drill down into really fine grain as to who's called that API in what context, in what session, what device they were logging in from, all of that kind of good stuff that we like in a an audit trail for a financial system. Next diagram, please, Warren. So one thing that's been talked about a lot in the BizOps framework context is make a checker, 4 eyes, some people call it, or 6 eyes, where no one person can authorize any particular or special action through the API. Let's say something really important like moving a big amount of money, performing a funds in or funds out, as we think about it in the Moduloop API. So we think the BizOps framework should enforce this, and the mechanism we're proposing is using a multi-step, multi-stage workflow, which is again a fairly common pattern that we've seen used all over the place to implement this type of thing, where again, following the same pattern we just looked at, the API caller with his token and his set of claims makes a request, and the service passes that request onto a workflow service, and the workflow service analyzes the permissions, the set of claims on the request, and decides how much work it can do. So at this stage, it might make an audit trail record to say this user initiated this process at this point in time under these credentials logged in from this device. And then it might pause the workflow because, well, that guy doesn't have the complete workflow permission. So on the next diagram, Warren, at that point, somebody else needs to intervene in order to authorize that action. So the authorizing user, he's logged in with his token and his set of claims, and his set of claims might contain a role that maps to permission that says he can authorize these workflows. There might be a financial limit, so user X might be able to authorize workflows up to some dollar amount, and some higher level of user might have a higher limit, for example. All of those things can be incorporated into this pattern. So when the workflow service receives that call to resume the workflow with the claims of the user making the request passed in, it can analyze that claim set and decide whether or not to allow the next stage of the workflow to occur. If it does, well, great. The workflow then makes its call to the next layer of API. In this case, something like a ledger service. I'm not suggesting that's a real example there, just an example to illustrate the point that workflow is what makes the final call to the underlying API. But that underlying API would be locked down to only receive calls from the workflow service, for example. So no user could directly call the workflow service. It would have to be called, through that chain of events. So we're proposing to implement a solution that delivers this functionality out of the box. So we want people who come along and pick up Moduloop off the shelf to see that it has strong authentication and authorization. It supports multi-step workflows for maker, checker, 4 eyes, 6 eyes, and it delivers on best practice patterns. Warren, is there another slide? Hello. Is there another slide, Warren?
No, I think, James, we're actually at the end. Sorry, I've been trying to follow the chat as well.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, so thank you for listening, everyone. If anyone has any questions or comments, wants to discuss any of the technicalities that we presented today, please do join the discussion tomorrow, but I'll hand back to Warren now. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, James. So PI 14, we need to get action moving. So please join the discussion tomorrow so we can ratify these positions that we've come to as a community. And we are asking, as I think are all work streams, really for people to come ready to offer some resources to support us meeting these objectives. We do want to get to participant lifecycle management. We want settlement, we want liquidity, we want auditing. So And in case you're in any doubt, there are many ways for you to contribute, either as, providing testing, engineering, whether it's to provide, join us in the design conversations, and or to work with us, with developers, front-end developers. Any of these are possible. And of course, we're hoping that we will continue to leverage the community's product owners and business operations and technical operations teams. Yesterday we had Thin from ThitsWorks discussing on a panel with Steve about the fact that ThitsWorks were looking at operating hubs in Myanmar. They are going to be key users of this technology and solution. We have Mawali, who has donated the version 1 finance portal, and as the community, we'd like to see some return on that investment really to them, and see solutions improve in their space. I was chatting to some folks earlier today how the TIPS team has kind of disappeared into a quiet space, but when they were last presenting at the convenings, they were showing great promise as well, actually, on how they were particularly providing DFSP portal support. So we're hoping one day they will return to the wider community and be able to share some of their evolution there. I'm just looking at some of the conversations in the chat. I'm not sure if there's any particular questions or if anybody would like to raise any questions. I think we
Can I just, I've just been reading the chat as well. I just spotted somebody mention multi-factor authentication. Yes, I forgot to mention that typically IAM solutions, certainly all of those that we've looked at recently, support 2FA or MFA out of the box. I don't think any decision's been made on the particular flavor of solution that we're proposing right now. It's great to see everyone talking about the options, though. Please do come along tomorrow and join that discussion.
That's excellent. Hey, guys, I wanted to make this one point as strongly as I can here within the context of your presentation, that it may not have come across, and I want to make sure it's reinforced, James, that you're presenting here something that is somewhat of a novel structure that you and I and others have been talking about for a while, which is the use of serverless technology to minimize the attack surface on an operator portal. And I think this is it's a new way of thinking about things that at first it sounds great, and then you start thinking about particular use cases, wondering, how am I going to do that if there's no server behind me? And it quickly becomes clear as you get into it that it's really just a different way of thinking about where the services are hosted and how they're exposed. And if they're exposed through an API service layer with a well-structured control layer on it, with the IAM strictures in place, then what you need from the front end is buttons and screens. And the rest of it is stuff that goes through the API, and the code that you're running in the browser is not really subject to attack. Somebody can do what they want at that. If they don't have a token, they can't do anything. You can also look at environments in which the API is exposed into an operations center, and only devices inside of that DMZ, inside of that operations center, would be permitted to connect. So in other words, it's web security first, then it's authentication security, and then it's application security below that, as you had mentioned. But I think one of the things that's interesting about this approach is that it opens up now a whole set of contribution potential for people that have front-end skills and can help with designing this hello world style of what would an operations center API look like. That said, it is moving away from the thick server-based design that was used by Mawali and that was used originally by others. And so looking at how would you get the functionality they have now translated into this new environment is, I would think, is part of showing that, well, you can't do that stuff. You can do different stuff. You want to say, you could do everything you were doing, but you can do it in this safer and more structured way using this new strategy. And so I think there's opportunity to both migrate the existing finance portal functionality over into this new mode. There's also a way of thinking about new stuff the finance portal simply didn't do, but that was needed. Things that you talked about, participant lifecycle management, settlement, so forth, other things that maybe go beyond what the original finance portal did. So there's definitely points, I think, here where we can get the community more involved in designing out this layer. We do want to be careful that we are API driven. That is, we're designing the API for the functionality that we need and that it needs. And we're designing the security layers around that and not being driven by what would the screen need to have on it so much. I mean, there's a domain driven design aspect to this to say, what do I need to control? And then how do I go about building in that control into the system? And then what screens would I then use to access that control and functionality, rather than I'm going to build a control screen. Now, what kind of API do I need in order to do that? We don't, it's the tail wagging the dog. And I think you've outlined that, James. I just wanted to make sure that I reinforce the point here that we don't have to wait until the API is completely done and baked. There's an opportunity for people to get more involved in learning how these tools work in this serverless API environment. And I'm wondering too, it's a question, could I offer to bring in a consultant resource, as we did with Kafka and some of the others, to maybe do a workshop for interested folks around that front end technology? We'll have to look and see.
Yeah, absolutely. The more I've dug into this, the more I've kind of realized that it's being done in a lot more places than you realize already. You know, if you look at something like a React or what's the other one? Angular, that's the one. Thank you. Yeah, they're just essentially static bundles as well that you can distribute from a CDN.
Yeah.
So, you know, even what we think of today as being traditional frameworks like React and Angular, they kind of follow this pattern as well. So we're not a million miles away.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think as Adrian's pointing out in the chat, and the thing that got us all started on this was to looking at the formality that's now called Jamstack, which it goes a bit further than Angular, which is it can be server based, and it's often server based. But what you can say with Angular is, yeah, but it doesn't have to be. You can actually serve a minified static page that still has all the functionality you would expect from an Angular application. But the assumption is that all functions are being served from individual API access and not from a thick server that's actively giving you content from its own layer.
No rendering on the server. That's
Thank you.
Yeah. The server does no rendering.
Yeah, and so it's good. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Adrian. Jamstack.org was the resource that we started with in thinking about this, and Netlify and some of the others. Even Jekyll, to a certain degree, is treated as a Jamstack CMS. Or I don't think we're proposing to use Jekyll here. We would want something that's more flexible than that. But the point is that you can still use automated design tools if you choose to use them in a Jamstack environment. It's just that the result is a static page that's served off of the CDN, as opposed to something like WordPress, where you're designing into an active thick and something that a thick server that requires constant upgrading and service management, security patches. You want to be in something that doesn't require those things. It's pretty simple.
Correct. Just picking up on point Leslie-Anne was making about the changes and how this affect adoption and timelines. I think you mentioned this earlier, but this doesn't have to be an all or nothing, and I think we can see a way through where we can start migrating and implementing and leveraging assets across the community sooner rather than later. And in actual fact, it's great to go and see things like the Cyber demo videos. I'll reference them again. Stefan coordinated those for us all, and it's great to see the level of functionality that can be made there. And as we move this into a new presentation layer, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. So we we can get there in a piecemeal approach, an incremental approach that actually takes us to this to a sensible scenario.
Okay, Pierre speaking. Can I chip in for a sec?
Mm-hmm.
So first, thanks for feature-wise, content-wise, etc. It's really I really like the summary of the four areas that this portal should address. I think it's really completely in line with the needs that we have identified. So thanks for that. Having something that is really operational and secure with proper user tracking is really important for us in that space. So that's great. I'm not entirely reassured about the point that was raised by Leslie, and I had exactly the same thought, which I think is not the first time has happened in this project, to be honest. Which is that there's a temptation to play with the latest technologies. I wouldn't say for the sake of it, but with the hope that they will allow to do things that couldn't be done before, which is in a way relevant because we want to do something that is cheaper, etc. So and really usable with all the constraints of financial services. So I get that. My honest take is that we don't always avoid the trick of being tempted to play with the latest toys we have at hand, right? By the way, it's also true for the convenings themselves. But so we should look very, very hard into this and be as honest as we can. As are we going into something that is already into a technology to implement this portal that is already well understood and well mastered? Because otherwise, we're going to spend 90% of the resource trying to get to grips with it, right? And that's not what we want. So I would be pretty adamant on that, saying, go to something safe. I wouldn't say simple because it's always, technology is always hard, but something that we're sure we understand from A to Z before jumping in, because otherwise, I know where the resource is going to go.
Well said, Pierre. And I think the point here is that by making this an API-driven design process, it leaves open different front-end technologies. If somebody wants to put a web server in front of it, they can. What we don't want to do is drill holes into the layer to allow for bespoke implementations of operator front ends. That's too deep and too hard to manage, too hard to secure. What we want to get to is an active layer of security with appropriate IAM stack. And then from that, an API that you can expose the functionality to appropriate roles. And the things, for example, like separation of controls, dual ICE, 4ICE principles, dual control, can all be done generically within the access and permissions layer, and then referenced from whatever front-end technology you choose to use. I don't think we'd be forcing someone to use the new technology for the front end if they choose not to do that. We want to make sure, though, that we have a strong API that's open to a modular approach to the development of that front end. We do believe that Jamstack is pretty well studied at this point. Most people that are involved in application design think about web servers. They don't think about this, but as was pointed out, it's actually more broadly used than would at first be noticed. And so I don't see that as being a pivot point. But you're right about saying that whatever we introduce should have a well-studied application underneath it, that we're not trying to do new science here. We're trying to do engineering based on well-studied practices, and that, such as the use of RBAC and APIs for the access to the system. So yeah, we should apply caution at each of the platform selection steps. I do agree with your point there.
I guess I'll echo that in the point of having these layers and getting the bottom portions established, the APIs, the security mechanism, et cetera, is to enable implementers to have some flexibility in how they expose experiences. Having said that, we do think it's important to build that Moja Loop itself gets to the point where it has in it a complete experience. So that I guess to Leslie Ann's point, the job of actually deploying this thing and the cost of maintaining this thing comes down over time, because we do know enough about what most implementers would need as a basis to give them that. And then if they choose to extend that or reskin that or replace that, they can, but they don't have to. So I guess it shouldn't be a requirement to have to build the entire administrative and monitoring and management experience to bring the thing live. But if you want to create a better one, you could.
Yeah, I think Leslie Ann's making a point too in the chat there. You know, we are trying to approach this as a slice through, not a horizontal layer. We're not going to try appear to replace the entire system all in a PI or replace all the services, but we are going to provide that cross-cutting, you know, business functionality delivered end to end. So those APIs are there actually providing that experience we've been talking about. And then the skinning on top, there's the migration from where we are at the moment is a React-based web front end. And in fact, we've been doing part of this with the Works and the team in Myanmar and getting ready for their Myanmar microfinance hub there, that actually, you know, there's a lot of this stuff which is coming in the pipeline.
Yeah, you know, having heard Pierre's concerns and everybody else's input, I don't think something like React or Angular is out of the question here. It's probably not the place to have that discussion right now, but do join the session tomorrow. You know, I think these patterns, that what's important, like Miller said, is that the basic underlying pattern is correct. If we do that, the choice of UI front end framework is not quite so critical.
And I'll tie together something Miller said earlier, and I think Leslie Ann just said in chat, which is to Miller's end, the APIs themselves need to be about what's the job that needs to be done on the system, like what is the actual job somebody's trying to do, and then the UX side of it is how do they experience that, and you want to have those things be cleanly separated. And so how do you come to that in the right sort of way? And Leslie Ann's kind of advocating for pick a job that actually needs doing, that is demonstrable and that is useful to anybody implementing the hub, and take that end to end and let that massage the actual APIs and the technologies that were brought to bear to generate that UX layer, and then iterate on that versus trying to get the APIs right and then kind of coming up the stack.
Great. So please join us on the sessions tomorrow. I think we are about out of time. Thank you very much, everyone.